Lord, help us to see you more clearly, to love you more dearly, to follow you more clearly day by day. Amen. Please sit. Today I want to tell you about a trick and a trap and a cure. Now, in our gospel reading today, the Sadducees are trying to trick Jesus into a trap. He doesn't fall for it because he's Jesus. But it is a trap that we fall into quite a bit. And it is a trick that we often play on other people, use on other people, maybe even use on ourselves. This trick is when we have already pre-decided that we are right about something before even engaging with someone else. And because we pre-decided that we're right already, we're more interested in demonstrating our rightness than in actually exploring with someone who disagrees how we can actually do what's right. And the trap. The trap is how we can take somebody else and put themselves, we can take somebody, we can put them on the outside. We can make them other, make them not one of us. And then once we've done that, it gives us permission for all sorts of harm. You see, the Sadducees, in this case, have already pre-decided they don't like Jesus and are going to try to put him in that trap. We know they're not coming into it genuinely because the Sadducees don't even believe in the resurrection when they're questioning Jesus about how the resurrection will work. That's at least, if nothing else, because of their beliefs. The Sadducees are that group of Jewish followers that only follow the Torah, those the five books of Moses, as opposed to, say, the Pharisees that Jesus more often encounters in his group, which have the Torah, but then in addition to that, all of the further teachings and the prophets, which is where most of the material comes from that helps us to understand the idea of the resurrection to life. And since the Sadducees don't have that, they don't believe that the resurrection is a thing. They're going into this not genuine in their argument with Jesus, but trying to catch him out, to make him look other, to get folks to turn against him. And like I said, he doesn't fall for it. But it is a trick and a trap that we fall into quite frequently, and it's something that we start off at a very early age already trying out on one another. And while we start off small, if we continue to try it, it can grow and it can build and can actually be quite harmful. A couple of examples. Starting out at an early age, I asked my youngest son if I could use permission for this story. He gave me permission, but my youngest son one time, he may be 4 years old or so, and he had made a mess. And he had already pre-decided there is no way he's taking care of that mess. And so when we asked him to do it, he said no. We said, you need to take care of the mess. And you can see the light bulb goes off, and he goes, I'm dead. It didn't work. We were not fooled by him. But it starts so young, so early already, far more interested in seeing his way as right than in trying to engage with someone who disagrees and find out what is the right thing to do. And it starts off small and it's innocent, but it doesn't stop there. It continues on. It gets more serious. It doesn't get more serious than maybe World War II. Pretty serious. Joseph Stalin in the 1930s had a spy network all throughout Europe and Asia. But despite all of the intelligence gathering, he had already pre-decided ahead of time that Germany was not going to invade the Soviet Union. And so when his own spies came back to him and
told them they had evidence that Germany was planning on invading the Soviet Union, he would have none of it. He had already pre-decided. They must be wrong. And even later, when his spy network came back and told him that Japan was planning on opening up the war in the Pacific, beginning with an attack on Pearl Harbor, he decided they were wrong. And rather than follow their advice or be open to change, he instead set the trap on them. Had his own intelligence networks rounded up, incarcerated, many of them killed. And imagine how different World War II would have been if Stalin had been willing to act on that information ahead of time. So the stakes can get quite high. And it is something that we do in the church, too. We have played these tricks and set these traps on one another throughout history, even in the church. It's hard to imagine from one time, thousands of years ago, early first century Christians who were themselves a young group on the fringe, believing in this idea of Jesus as their Messiah, and they were the outsiders pointing in at where there was injustice and wrongdoing. And how quickly in the span of just a few hundred years, the church, after the time of Constantine, after the church itself was no longer at the fringes and the outside of power, but now found itself at the center of power, how quickly we started using that trap. The same kind of trap the Sadducees set for Jesus. And if reading in the gospel and it makes us squirm just a little bit to be edging into the idea of sexual politics and the resurrection and in the church and who should be allowed to marry who, it should make us squirm just a little bit. That's the idea of trying to make Jesus squirm just a little bit. And when we in the church found ourselves using these same kinds of tricks and traps to pre-decide who was in and who was out, who decided to be right and wrong, we went to the same direction often of those same sort of sexual politics. Often deciding who's allowed to marry who based on the color of their skin. It turned into, if someone is divorced, they're not allowed to receive communion in this church, or if someone was using contraception, they're not allowed to receive communion, or we're not going to baptize a baby that was born out of wedlock, or we're not going to baptize this baby who's being raised by two mothers. And if you look, not one of those things is actually closely related to anything Jesus talked about. If you're following through the whole Gospel of Luke, all of that time we have spent in the church playing the sexual politics, it's not ever where Jesus' priority was. He made it pretty clear where his priorities were. Feeding the hungry, lifting up those who had been made low, giving God's grace freely, whether somebody had earned it or not. Jesus said time and time again, loving God and loving your neighbor. He made it very clear that that's where his priorities were, not trying to determine who had the right to marry who. And so when we find ourselves in the odd position of siding with the Sadducees in an argument against Jesus, we ought to take note. Now, where is the cure in all this? The cure in all this, that's Jesus again. The cure in all of this is that same Jesus who in this gospel story today would not fall for this trap. And realize that as human beings, as much as we try to draw division lines about who is one of us and who is not, based on race, based on gender, sexuality, based on ethnicity or nationality, trying to draw all of those borders, Jesus wouldn't fall for it because what he turns to is in the resurrection. None of that matters. All of those human divisions we make against ourselves is all irrelevant in the resurrection, where there is no Jew or Greek, nor slave, nor free. There's no white or black, male or female, married, unmarried, divorced, remarried. There's not even alive or dead as a distinction, because all are alive in Jesus, in the resurrection. And so we can lean on that, lean into that cure as we continue to live in a very human world where we will still have these distinctions, where we will still have these tools we use to decide who is in and who is out. And as we are living in a world where there are often those border lines drawn on race and sexuality and ethnicity and gender and nationality, we can remember all those human divisions that we've made will fall away. When they do fall away, we will all be alive in the resurrection. And so now as we move forward and we try to decide how are we going to live our lives, we can ask ourselves, how can we live a little more toward that ideal, where those distinctions just don't matter quite so much. They're just not where the priority is. And as we try to lean into where Jesus pointed to where the real priorities are, how to love those around us, how to feed those who are hungry, how to take care of the widow and orphaned, how to raise up those who are low, how to spread love for God and our neighbor. We here, while we are one foot in the world, we are also here in this space where we are the church, and we can provide an example, just a little bit of an example, a little bit of a glimpse of where those priorities can be different. We are not here in St. James at this time in a place where all of those proud divisions have ceased. They're still here in this space. But we are the people who believe in the resurrection and believe that we will all be alive and we are all one in that resurrection. And so here in this space, at least, in this space, we can try to set those divisions away as we decide who we welcome in and who we close our doors to, who is deserving to come and receive here with us as part of our communion and who is not, who is worthy of our love, who is worthy of our respect. And we can strive toward that vision of the resurrection. Thanks be to God. Amen.